I was Scarlett O'Hara, 30 years old, the founder of a technology empire worth $50 million, a fact meticulously hidden from my parents. Our home in Mid Creek, a quaint Midwestern town, was a shrine to academic prowess. My father, Martin Blackwood, a tenured economics professor at Mid Creek University, was a local legend. My mother, Evelyn Blackwood, principal of Mid Creek High, upheld educational standards with an iron fist. Achievement wasn't just admired, it was the air we breathed. Every dinner was a thesis defense, especially when my older sister, Victoria, 4 years my senior and seemingly flawless, was mentioned. Victoria aced her medical school exam, my father would declare, his gaze falling on me. What about your algebra, Scarlett? Victoria, always the golden child, aced every test, captained the debate team, and was destined for medical school. The path for a Blackwood was clear. Academic excellence, a prestigious university, a professional degree. Entrepreneurship? It was a dirty word. Yet something in me beat to a different drum. While Victoria memorized anatomy, I was selling handmade jewelry at 10, and by 12, I was the street's unofficial tech support, fixing computers for $20 an hour. It's sweet you have a little hobby, my mother would say, patting my head, even as I counted my daily earnings. But don't let it distract from your studies. My father was less subtle. Peddling trinkets won't get you into a respectable institution, he'd scoff, barely glancing at the business cards I'd designed. This phase needs to end. Every family gathering was a coronation for Victoria. Her medical school acceptance was met with an extravagant party, a toast from my father about the true Blackwood tradition of excellence. I sat in a corner, quietly designing a website for a local boutique. The contrast was stark. That same year, I won a regional young entrepreneurs competition. My parents? Faculty commitments, they'd said, though Facebook later showed them at a department dinner. It wasn't that I couldn't excel academically. I earned good grades when I applied myself. But classroom discussions felt like shackles. My passion was in the world, testing real business ideas, learning by doing. By senior year, the pressure was suffocating. College applications littered our dining table. Northwestern has an excellent economics program, my father suggested, pointing. Or perhaps Yale? Your grades are not quite Ivy League, but a colleague of mine in admissions... I'm not going to college, I said, looking him in the eye. The silence was deafening. My mother dropped her fork. My father's face turned crimson. That is not an option, he finally said, each word a hammer blow. No child of mine will squander their education. This ridiculous business fantasy ends now. But for the first time, I stood my ground. I had saved money from my tech support and online sales. I had a business plan, contacts, and a determination that no classroom could contain. I'm starting my own company, I explained, my voice steady. If it doesn't work out in 2 years, I'll reconsider college. Their response was immediate and united. No financial or emotional support unless I applied to college. They were certain I'd fail without their guidance. A month after graduation, while my classmates prepared for orientation, I moved into a tiny studio apartment on the edge of town. I was 18, terrified, and utterly alone. My first apartment was barely 400 square feet, the kitchenette so small I could touch both walls. Rent devoured most of my savings, leaving just enough for a used desk, a second-hand laptop, and ramen noodles that became breakfast and dinner. But it was mine, a sanctuary where my choices weren't questioned. My business, Nova Solutions, an e-commerce platform connecting local artisans with online buyers, was born there. The concept was simple. Talented craftspeople lacked the technical know-how to sell online. I would build their web presence, handle logistics, and take a small percentage. Those early days were a blur of 16-hour workdays, coding until my eyes burned, cold calling clients, and facing relentless rejection. Many nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering if my parents were right. My bank account dwindled dangerously. "How's the business going?" my mother would ask during our increasingly rare calls, the sarcasm in her voice almost palpable. The community college still has late enrollment options. The first small triumph came 3 months in when Lily's handcrafted soaps joined my platform and started making sales. Then came Thompson's Woodworking, followed by 8 more artisans. The commissions were modest, but they kept the lights on and validated my concept. While my business struggled, family gatherings became endurance tests. At Thanksgiving dinner, 6 months after I'd moved out, the conversation revolved entirely around Victoria's medical residency. "Dr. Victoria says she has the steadiest hands in the program," my father announced proudly, carving the turkey. When he finally turned to me, his expression shifted. "And Scarlett is still selling things online. Nova Solutions now represents 15 artisans, with a combined monthly revenue of..." I began. "Diane's daughter just started at Cornell," my mother interrupted, passing the cranberry sauce. Scarlett, imagine where you could be now." It was at a local business networking event that I met Margaret Wilson, founder of a thriving software company, and the first person who didn't immediately ask where I went to college. Instead, she asked insightful questions about my business model, user experience, and scaling strategy. "You've got good instincts," she told me over coffee the following week, "but your current model has limited growth potential. Have you considered the B2B space?" Under Margaret's mentorship, Nova Solutions pivoted. Instead of just artisan products, we began developing custom software solutions for small businesses. Appointment scheduling, inventory management, customer relationship tools. These required more complex development, but commanded higher prices and created recurring revenue. By year 3, I had 5 employees working from a small office downtown. Our client list had grown to over 30 businesses, and for the first time, I was paying myself a consistent salary. It wasn't wealth by any standard, but I no longer counted pennies at the grocery store. My family remained unimpressed. At Christmas that year, Victoria announced her engagement to another doctor. My parents beamed, immediately discussing venues and guest lists. When conversation briefly turned to my work, my father's dismissal was swift. "Scarlett helps businesses with their computers," he explained to relatives, as if I ran a one-person IT help desk instead of a growing software company. Later that evening, I overheard my mother talking to Aunt Eleanor in the kitchen. "We're still hoping she'll come to her senses," she whispered. "Such a waste of potential. No degree, no professional network, just selling things online." I bit my tongue, knowing that trying to explain the complexities of custom software development or our growing client base would fall on deaf ears. In their world, success without academic credentials simply didn't compute. The final insult came during Victoria's extravagant wedding, where I was seated at the distant relative's table. During his speech, my father praised his accomplished daughter, the doctor, and her equally accomplished husband. He never once acknowledged his other daughter, sitting in the corner, the one whose company had just landed its first 6-figure contract. On the drive home, I made a decision. I would stop seeking their approval. My company would succeed or fail on its own merits, and I would measure my worth by my own standards, not theirs. That resolution would be tested sooner than I expected. The breakthrough came in my 4th year when Grand Market, a regional chain with 50 locations, approached us about developing an inventory management system. Their existing software was outdated, causing inefficiencies. This wasn't just another small business client. This was the kind of contract that could transform Nova Solutions overnight. They're considering several vendors, my lead developer warned. Companies much larger than us. Then we'll work harder than all of them, I replied, already mentally preparing for sleepless nights. For 3 weeks, my team and I worked around the clock, developing prototypes and refining our pitch. When we presented to Grand Market's executive team, my heart pounded as their CTO asked pointed technical questions. "You're a small operation," he noted. "What happens when we need support at 2 a.m.? On a Saturday?" "I'll personally answer that call," I said without hesitation, "and I'll keep answering until your issue is resolved." 2 days later, Grand Market signed a $500,000 contract with Nova Solutions. That night, I took my entire team out for dinner, the first real celebration in the company's history. The Grand Market's success opened doors. Suddenly, businesses were coming to us, referred by satisfied clients. We expanded to 15 employees and moved to a proper office in the downtown business district. Our annual revenue crossed the $1 million mark, and for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that I had created something truly sustainable. It was during this upswing that I received an unexpected call from my mother. "Your father's been let go," she said, her voice uncharacteristically shaky. "University budget cuts. They're eliminating his entire department." At 56, my father was too young for retirement, but faced dismal prospects in academia. My mother continued, hesitation in her voice. "And I've been having these headaches. The doctor wants to run some tests. Our insurance isn't great with the deductibles." The implications were clear. My proudly self-sufficient parents were in financial trouble. "How much do you need?" I asked simply. Through a complicated arrangement involving my company's lawyer and a trust, I began covering my parents' mortgage payments without their direct knowledge. They believed a university separation package was providing temporary relief. Similarly, when my mother was diagnosed with a condition requiring specialized treatment not fully covered by insurance, I established a medical assistance fund through my lawyer that paid the bills directly. My father eventually found part-time teaching work, but it paid a fraction of his former salary. To supplement this, I created a shell consulting company that hired him to review educational content for business training materials, work that was unnecessary but provided him with dignity and a paycheck. When Victoria's twins were born, their education funds appeared mysteriously in newly created accounts, courtesy of an investment from a family friend that was actually my contribution. All the while, I maintained a modest lifestyle despite my growing wealth. I drove a practical car, lived in a comfortable but unassuming apartment, and gave vague answers about my company's success. The charade required careful management. Separate phone lines for family and business, redirected mail, and an elaborate web of trusts and shell companies to obscure the financial support. "The business is doing fine," I would say during family dinners, downplaying our rapid expansion and the fact that we now served clients across 3 states. My mother would nod absently. "That's nice, dear," before turning to Victoria to discuss her twins' developmental milestones or her husband's latest medical publication. The psychological toll of this double life grew heavier. In business settings, I was Scarlett O'Hara, confident CEO of a thriving tech company, profiled in regional business publications with strict instructions to exclude photos or personal details. At family gatherings, I was still the disappointing daughter who had chosen a hobby over proper education. After a particularly successful quarter, I finally allowed myself one visible indulgence: a beautiful beach house in Azure Bay, Florida. I justified it as both an investment and a necessary sanctuary, somewhere I could be my authentic self, away from the judgmental eyes of my family and the pressures of running a growing company. Just a rental property investment, I explained on the rare occasions family members inquired about my increasing absences during winter weekends. As Nova Solutions approached its 8th year, our team had grown to over 200 employees, with a valuation approaching $50 million. We had developed an AI-driven analytics platform that was revolutionizing how small and medium businesses handled customer data and acquisition. Offers from larger tech companies had started arriving with alarming frequency. Through it all, my family remained oblivious to my success, even as they grew increasingly dependent on my covert financial support. My father, while accepting the mysterious consulting income, began making snide remarks about my work. "Still playing with computers?" he asked during a family dinner, shortly after I'd turned down a $35 million acquisition offer. "Victoria's hospital just named her department head." My mother nodded proudly. "The youngest in the hospital's history." Victoria herself had begun noticing discrepancies in my carefully constructed facade. "Interesting watch," she commented, eyeing my wrist during a holiday gathering. "That looks like the new Cardon. Aren't those around $10,000? "Just a good replica," I lied, mentally kicking myself for the oversight. The exhaustion of maintaining the charade while supporting my unappreciative family finally reached a breaking point. As we approached another Thanksgiving, I made a decision. It was time for the truth. No more hiding, no more secret support, no more diminishing my achievements to protect fragile egos. I would reveal everything at the family dinner: my company's success, the extent of my financial support, and the true nature of my career. After years of judgment, I was finally ready for my family to see me for who I really was. I never anticipated just how catastrophic that revelation would be. By our 6th year, Nova Solutions had evolved far beyond its humble beginnings. What started as a simple e-commerce platform had transformed into a technology powerhouse, specializing in AI-driven analytics. Our flagship product, Insight Edge, revolutionized how businesses understood customer behavior, turning complex data into actionable intelligence. The market response was extraordinary. Our client list expanded exponentially, with companies willing to pay premium prices for our proprietary algorithms. Revenue soared, and suddenly, I found myself leading a company valued at $50 million, a number that sometimes felt surreal, even to me. Tech giants took notice. First came the partnership inquiries, then the acquisition offers. The initial bid from Nexus Tech, $75 million, left me speechless. 6 months later, DataCore upped the ante to $35 million. I turned them all down, much to the confusion of some team members. "That's life-changing money," said Liam, our operations director, after I declined the third offer. "Why not cash out?" The truth was complex. This company wasn't just a business to me. It was vindication, proof that traditional education wasn't the only path to success. Selling felt like surrendering a piece of my identity. Beyond that, I genuinely believed our best innovations still lay ahead. While the company flourished, I maintained a grueling balancing act with my family. The financial support I provided had grown substantially. My father's consulting salary now matched his former professor's income. My mother's medical treatments, some experimental and entirely uncovered by insurance, were paid in full through my hidden channels. Victoria's children attended exclusive private preschools, courtesy of their scholarship funds. All this generosity remained cloaked in elaborate financial structures designed to protect my family's pride while hiding my success. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was simultaneously the family disappointment and their anonymous benefactor. Regional Innovator Award goes to Nova Solutions, read the Business Journal headline that made me simultaneously proud and anxious. The accompanying article praised our company's growth and innovation. Thankfully, using only a small headshot that wouldn't draw family attention. My personal sanctuary became increasingly important as the pressures mounted. The beach house in Azure Bay represented more than just a luxury. It was the one place where I could be completely authentic. The sound of waves, the warmth of Florida sunshine, and the absence of judgment created a peaceful contrast to my complicated life back home. During one particularly stress-filled period, I spent 3 consecutive weekends in Florida, drawing suspicious questions from my mother. "Another business trip?" she asked, her tone suggesting skepticism. "You seem to be away an awful lot for someone running a small computer business." "Client meetings," I replied vaguely, wondering how she'd react if she knew I'd just flown there on a private charter after closing a multi-million-dollar deal. The dynamics with my father grew increasingly strained. Despite the financial lifeline, his resentment seemed to deepen. Perhaps it was wounded pride from his unexpected career derailment, or maybe it was the cognitive dissonance of accepting help from the daughter whose choices he'd so thoroughly disapproved of. "When are you going to get a real job?" he asked during a Sunday dinner, shortly after I'd been featured in Tech Visionary's Under 35 magazine. "You can't fix computers forever." I'd long stopped trying to explain that I didn't fix computers, that I ran a rapidly growing technology company with hundreds of employees and innovative products. Such corrections only seemed to aggravate his dismissal. My mother, ever the conciliator, maintained a careful neutrality that ultimately enabled my father's behavior. "Your father just wants what's best for you," she'd say, after particularly hurtful comments, never acknowledging that perhaps I'd already found what was best for myself. Victoria's attitude shifted from dismissive to subtly envious, as small signs of my wealth occasionally slipped through my careful facade. The designer handbag I absent-mindedly carried, the casual mention of a business trip to Tokyo, the new luxury SUV I explained away as a company car. Each detail fueled her growing suspicion. "And fixing computers must be more lucrative than I thought," she remarked pointedly after noticing my designer shoes at a family birthday celebration. The strain of this double life began taking its toll. I developed insomnia, checking my phone at 3 a.m. to ensure no financial transfers could be traced back to me. I maintained separate wardrobes, conservative, middle-income appropriate clothes for family functions, and the designer attire more suited to my actual position for business events. I scheduled dentist appointments in different cities to avoid family members, discovering I had the premium dental insurance typically reserved for high-level executives. As my 30th birthday approached, exhaustion settled deep in my bones. The company continued its meteoric rise. We now had offices in 3 cities, and Forbes had included me in their ones to watch section. Meanwhile, my father's most recent birthday card included a newspaper clipping about adult education programs at the community college. During a late-night strategy session with my executive team, I found myself staring out the window of our sleek downtown office. "Scarlett," Liam called, pulling me from my thoughts. "We need your input on the European launch." I turned back to the room, to these people who respected my vision and valued my expertise, and made a decision. The charade had gone on long enough. It was time for honesty, whatever the consequences. "I'm going to tell my family everything," I announced to Maya, my assistant and closest confidant, the next morning. "At Thanksgiving dinner next week." Her expression reflected concern. "Are you sure that's wise? You've gone to extraordinary lengths to keep them in the dark." "That's exactly the problem," I replied, feeling a strange mix of terror and relief. "I'm tired of hiding who I am and what I've built. If they can't accept my success on my terms, then perhaps it's time to reevaluate those relationships entirely." I spent the next week preparing mentally, rehearsing what I would say, gathering documentation of my company's growth, and even compiling records of the financial support I'd provided. Part of me hoped that, faced with irrefutable evidence, my family might finally offer the acknowledgement I'd long stopped expecting. The Thanksgiving table was set, the familiar family china arranged perfectly, as always. As I helped my mother bring out the final dishes, I resolved that this would be the last holiday I spent diminishing myself to soothe others' egos. For better or worse, the truth would finally be served alongside the turkey and cranberry sauce. Thanksgiving at the Blackwood household had always followed the same script. Mother's perfectly roasted turkey, father's ceremonial carving, Victoria's updates on her medical career, and minimal interest in my computer business. This year would be different. I arrived early, my stomach in knots, a portfolio of company information tucked discreetly in my handbag. The familiar scent of sage and butter filled the air as my mother fussed over last-minute preparations. "Need any help?" I offered, setting down a bottle of expensive champagne I'd brought for the revelation. "Oh, that's not necessary," she replied, barely glancing at the bottle. "Victoria is bringing wine. She knows a specialist who imports from small French vineyards." My father entered, newspaper tucked under his arm. "Scarlett," he acknowledged with a nod before turning to my mother. "Is Victoria here yet? I want to tell her about the hospital board position Arthur mentioned." The scene was so familiar, it was almost comical. My presence, a mere footnote to the anticipated arrival of my sister. Today, that would change. Victoria arrived with her husband David and their twins, creating the usual flurry of excitement. "Dr. Victoria Blackwood Winters," my father announced proudly, as if her married name and title were a single honorific. Dinner proceeded predictably. Victoria detailed her latest medical conference presentation, while my parents listened with rapt attention. David discussed his recent publication in a prestigious medical journal. The twins' preschool achievements were meticulously cataloged. When the conversation finally lulled, I took a deep breath and reached for the champagne. "I thought we might celebrate something today," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Oh," my mother looked confused. "And is there an occasion we've forgotten?" "Actually, yes." I poured myself a glass of courage. Nova Solutions was valued at $50 million last month. The silence that followed was absolute. My father's fork paused midway to his mouth. "What are you talking about?" Victoria finally asked, her tone suggesting I'd made an absurd joke. "My company, the computer business you've all dismissed for years." I withdrew several magazine articles from my bag, spreading them across the table. "We've revolutionized data analytics for small and medium businesses. We have over 200 employees in 3 cities, and I'm the CEO." My father scoffed, picking up one of the articles. "This can't be your company." "Nova is a common name." "It's mine, Dad." I slid the Forbes feature toward him, where my photo was unmistakable. "Everything I've built over the past 8 years, while you were suggesting community college courses." My mother's face had gone pale. "But you never said anything. You drive that ordinary car. Your apartment is so modest." "Because I didn't want you to know," I admitted. I was tired of being judged for not following the traditional path. Victoria examined the articles with growing disbelief. "This says you turned down a $35 million acquisition offer." "That can't be right." "It was actually $40 million by the time negotiations ended," I corrected. "I declined because we're worth more independently." Rather than the pride or even grudging respect I'd hoped for, my father's expression darkened. "So you've been lying to us for years?" "No more than you've been lying to yourselves," I countered, believing I was struggling when I was thriving. Dismissing my career while accepting my financial support, "What financial support?" my mother asked, confusion evident. This was the moment of absolute truth, or I pulled out another folder. "Your mortgage has been paid by my trust for the past 4 years. Mom's medical treatments that insurance mysteriously covered? That was me. Dad's consulting position that appeared after the university cut his department? I created a shell company to hire you. Victoria's Children's Education Funds. Also, me." The color drained from my father's face as he stared at the documents. Bank transfers, trust arrangements, all the elaborate financial architecture I'd constructed to help them while protecting their pride. This isn't possible," he whispered, but the evidence was irrefutable. My mother began crying quietly. "Why wouldn't you tell us?" "Would you have accepted direct help from your failure of a daughter?" I asked softly. "The one who chose business over college? The disappointment?" Victoria's expression had transformed from shock to something uglier. Resentment. "So while I was working 100-hour weeks in residency, you were secretly becoming some tech millionaire?" "While you were following the path you wanted," I corrected, "I was following mine. The difference is, I respected your choices." My father pushed back from the table abruptly, the chair legs scraping harshly against hardwood. "Enough! I don't know what game you're playing or what you're trying to prove with these fabrications, but I won't sit here and listen to more lies. Everything I've told you is true," I said quietly. "Everything you can verify independently if you choose to." He stood, trembling with what I now recognized as fear rather than anger. Fear that his worldview was crumbling, that the daughter he dismissed had succeeded beyond his comprehension outside the narrow path he'd prescribed. If you've done what you claim," he said, voice shaking, "then you've done it by turning your back on everything this family values. Education, tradition, honesty." "I've only turned my back on arbitrary limitations," I replied. That's when he said the words I'll never forget. His face contorted with a mixture of rage and humiliation. "Get out of my house, you uneducated trash. You lowlife. I don't know what you're really doing to make this money, but no child of mine would behave this way." My mother gasped, but said nothing to contradict him. Victoria watched with strange satisfaction in her eyes. I looked around the table at my father's rage, my mother's silent complicity, my sister's resentment, and felt a peculiar calm settle over me. For years, I'd craved their approval, orchestrated my life to both support and appease them. In that moment, I realized how futile it had been. "Okay," I said simply, gathering my documents and standing. "If that's how you feel." "Scarlett," my mother began, but I raised my hand to stop her. "No, it's fine. I've spent years trying to be both the daughter you wanted and the person I actually am. I'm done with that impossible task." I walked to the door without looking back, my father's words echoing in my ears. As I stepped outside into the crisp November air, I felt something unexpected, not heartbreak, but relief. The charade was finally over. That night, in an impersonal hotel room, I allowed myself to fully process what had happened. There were tears, certainly, but also a growing sense of liberation. The next morning, I woke with clarity and purpose. It was time to live authentically, without apology or concealment. The family I'd been born into had rejected me at my moment of greatest vulnerability. Now, I would build something better. A life without pretense, surrounded by people who valued me for who I really was. The morning after Thanksgiving brought an unusual sensation: lightness. Despite the emotional devastation of the previous evening, I woke in my hotel room feeling as though a crushing weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in 8 years, I didn't need to maintain elaborate lies or diminish my achievements. The truth, however painfully received, was finally in the open. My first call was to Leonard Friedman, the attorney who had managed my family's covert financial support. "I need you to terminate all arrangements immediately," I instructed, my voice calm and decisive. "The mortgage payments, the medical fund, the consulting contract, the education trusts, all of it." "Are you certain?" Leonard asked, concern evident. "This represents significant financial adjustments for your family." "I'm certain," I replied. "They've made their position clear. I won't continue supporting people who view me as uneducated trash." Next, I contacted Maya, outlining my plans to relocate permanently to Florida. "Call a company-wide meeting for Monday morning," I said. "I'll announce the changes then." The weekend passed in a flurry of practical arrangements. My apartment lease would end in 30 days. Perfect timing. I arranged for movers to pack my belongings while I flew to Florida to prepare the beach house for permanent occupancy. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from my mother and, surprisingly, Victoria. I read none of them. This boundary was long overdue. Monday's company meeting brought expected shock, but also overwhelming support from my team. As some of you know, I've maintained a property in Azure Bay for several years, I explained to the assembled staff. "I'll be relocating there permanently and establishing a new headquarters office. Our operations here will continue unchanged under Liam's day-to-day leadership, with me connecting remotely and visiting monthly." Rather than resistance, I was met with understanding. Several key team members immediately volunteered to relocate to Florida to help establish the new office. "We're with you, Scarlett," said Rachel, our marketing director. "Wherever you lead this company, we'll follow." That support contrasted sharply with my family's reaction to the financial changes. 3 days after Thanksgiving, my father called, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded without preamble. "The bank says our mortgage payment was declined. My consulting contract is suddenly terminated." "Yes," I confirmed calmly. "I've ended all financial support, effective immediately." "You can't do this," he spluttered. "Your mother's treatments." "I can, and I have," I interrupted. "You made it abundantly clear that you want nothing to do with my low-life money. I'm respecting your wishes." He began backpedaling immediately. "Now, Scarlett, you misunderstood. I was upset, but family is family." "Exactly," I said. "And family doesn't call family uneducated trash. Family doesn't dismiss 8 years of hard work as criminal activity. Family supports each other's different paths instead of demanding conformity." The call ended with his threats to contest the financial changes. Empty threats, as Leonard assured me all arrangements had been legally structured to allow termination at my discretion. The calls and messages continued, evolving from angry demands to desperate pleas. The reality of their financial situation settled in. My mother's tearful voicemails detailed her medical concerns. Victoria's messages turned from condescending to conciliatory, suddenly interested in my impressive business acumen. I read and listened to them all, but responded to none. For the first time, I was prioritizing my own well-being over their demands and expectations. Azure Bay welcomed me with warm sunshine and fresh possibilities. My beach house, previously a weekend escape, became a true home. I redecorated, replacing the impersonal vacation decor with meaningful art and comfortable furnishings that reflected my actual taste, rather than the modest aesthetic I'd maintained for appearances. The new Nova Solutions office opened in downtown Azure Bay within 6 weeks, a modern space with ocean views and an open concept design that encouraged collaboration. Several key team members relocated, while others embraced the hybrid arrangement. Freed from the constant anxiety of discovery, I found myself engaging more authentically with my new community. I introduced myself to neighbors as the CEO of a successful tech company, rather than vaguely mentioning work in computers. I joined local business organizations and began building genuine connections. At a beach cleanup event, I met Ethan Reynolds, an environmental engineer who asked thoughtful questions about my company without a hint of skepticism about my credentials or success. "That's fascinating work," he said when I explained our analytics platform. "Have you considered applications for environmental data modeling?" There's tremendous potential there. Our conversation flowed easily, touching on business, environmental science, and our shared love of kayaking. When he asked me to dinner the following evening, I accepted without my usual hesitation about what might slip about my true circumstances. "I'd love to," I said simply, realizing how refreshing it felt to enter a relationship with complete transparency from the start. As weeks turned to months, the desperate communications from my family gradually tapered. The initial flurry of daily calls dwindled to weekly, then occasional messages. The tone evolved from demanding to pleading, culminating in letters that arrived at my new office address, my father apparently having researched the company location. The first letter was accusatory. "After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us, by abandoning your family in their time of need?" The second, received 2 weeks later, attempted guilt. "Your mother's condition is worsening without proper treatment. Is this the daughter we raised?" The third, arriving a month after that, offered a conditional olive branch. "Perhaps we were hasty in our judgment. If you would reconsider your rash decisions, we could discuss your business success more thoroughly." I read each one carefully, recognizing the manipulative patterns that had defined our relationship for years. None acknowledged the fundamental issue: their inability to accept my choices and success on my terms rather than theirs. Meanwhile, my life in Azure Bay flourished. The company continued its growth trajectory, launching new products and expanding into international markets. My relationship with Ethan deepened into something genuine and supportive, built on mutual respect rather than false pretenses. Most importantly, I found a community of fellow entrepreneurs who understood the journey I'd traveled. At a business leader retreat, I was surprised to discover how many successful founders had similar stories of family rejection or dismissal. "My parents didn't speak to me for 3 years after I dropped out of law school to start my company," shared Jessica, founder of a healthcare technology firm. "Now they brag about me to their friends." "My father called my business plan a fantasy and refused to even discuss it," added Mark, whose sustainable energy startup had recently gone public. "He sends me newspaper clippings about it now, as if he supported me all along." These conversations helped me realize that my experience, while painful, wasn't unique. The path of entrepreneurship often diverged from family expectations, creating rifts that sometimes healed with time and sometimes didn't. 6 months after my relocation, I received a text from Victoria that was different from the others. "I'm sorry. Not for everything. Not yet. But for not seeing what you were building. For not respecting your choices." It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was the first genuine acknowledgement from any family member. I responded with a simple "thank you" for that, opening the door just slightly to whatever might come next. As I stood on my beach house deck that evening, watching the sunset paint the Gulf of Mexico in brilliant oranges and pinks, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The painful confrontation at Thanksgiving had been necessary, the catalyst for finally living authentically. My phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. "Still on for dinner? I'm thinking that new seafood place on the marina." I smiled, typing back. "Perfect. Meet you there at 7. This was my life now, honest, unburdened, and entirely my own creation. The future stretched before me, full of possibilities, unbounded by others' expectations or limitations. For the first time, I was truly free. 6 months into my new life in Azure Bay, Nova Solutions had not just survived the transition, it had thrived. Our Azure Bay headquarters became the company's creative hub, while our original offices maintained operations under Liam's capable leadership. Our valuation had climbed to nearly $60 million, with interest from venture capital firms seeking to fuel further expansion. But the true transformation wasn't in business metrics. It was personal. Walking into our waterfront offices each morning, I no longer carried the burden of maintaining elaborate facades or diminishing my achievements. My wardrobe of deliberately modest attire gave way to clothes that reflected my actual success and personal style. The constant vigilance against accidentally revealing my true circumstances disappeared, replaced by an energizing authenticity. "You seem different," observed Rachel during our weekly strategy meeting. "More present, more you." She was right. For the first time since founding the company, I was fully inhabiting my role as CEO, without apology or concealment. This newfound authenticity extended beyond work. My relationship with Ethan deepened as weeks turned to months, built on honest foundations rather than carefully constructed half-truths. I've dated women who had shopping habits or past relationships, Ethan told me one evening as we walked along the shoreline. But you're the first who's been wildly successful. It's refreshingly backward. We laughed, but his observation highlighted the peculiarity of my previous life. In trying to maintain family relationships, I'd created barriers to forming authentic new connections. As my personal life flourished, I found myself reflecting on the educational journey that had caused such family conflict. Despite my success without formal higher education, I recognized its value for many paths, just not the universal requirement my parents had insisted upon. This realization inspired the Phoenix Innovation Scholarship, a foundation providing funding to entrepreneurs regardless of educational background. Whether college graduates, trade school attendees, or self-taught innovators, recipients shared one qualification: a brilliant business concept and the determination to execute it. "Education comes in many forms," I explained at the scholarship launch event. "Our goal is supporting innovation wherever it emerges, not just from traditional academic paths." The foundation became my passion project, allowing me to mentor young entrepreneurs facing the same skepticism I'd encountered. Particularly rewarding was supporting young women in technology who often battled both gender bias and educational prejudice. "My parents think tech is for guys with computer science degrees," shared Amelia, our first scholarship recipient, developing an innovative healthcare scheduling platform. "They want me to pursue something more suitable, like teaching." "Build it anyway," I advised. "Success has a way of changing minds." My own family remained a complicated work in progress. After months of emotional messages that ranged from guilt-inducing to conciliatory, my father finally sent a letter that resembled an actual apology. "I won't pretend to understand the path you've chosen," he wrote in his precise handwriting, "but I can no longer deny its success. My reaction at Thanksgiving was unworthy of both of us. The words I spoke came from fear and pride, not truth. I am sorry for that, though I understand if that apology comes too late." It was the first communication that didn't include demands for resumed financial support or conditions for reconciliation. I read it several times, recognizing the difficulty such an admission must have caused him. After careful consideration, I sent a measured response. "Thank you for your letter." The words hurt deeply, but more painful was the lifetime of dismissal that preceded them. I'm building a life, based on mutual respect and support. If you're interested in being part of that life, it needs to be on those terms. We weren't reconciled, but a door had opened slightly. My mother called soon after, her voice tentative and unfamiliar without its usual certainty. "We've had to make many adjustments," she explained, referring to their financial situation. "Your father is teaching more classes at the community college. I've returned to work part-time in school administration." I listened without offering solutions, allowing them the dignity of managing their own circumstances, just as I had when they offered no support for my early business attempts. This wasn't revenge. It was establishing healthy boundaries that should have existed years earlier. Victoria and I established a cautious communication pattern. Her initial apology text evolved into occasional phone calls. Awkward at first, but gradually more genuine. The competitive dynamic that had defined our relationship since childhood slowly transformed into something resembling mutual respect. "The twins asked about their entrepreneurial aunt yesterday," she mentioned during one call. "Apparently, Jacob wants to start a lemonade stand and thinks you're the expert to consult." It was a small thing, but a significant acknowledgement of my expertise in my chosen field, rather than dismissal of its legitimacy. As my company continued growing, I found myself creating a different kind of family, a chosen one of friends, colleagues, and mentors who supported each other without conditional approval. Sunday dinners at my beach house became a tradition, gathering a diverse group of people who accepted each other's different paths and celebrated various forms of success. To authenticity, Ethan toasted at one such gathering a year after my relocation, and to finding your people, wherever they may be. The contrast with my family's Thanksgiving disaster couldn't have been starker. Here was genuine warmth without judgment, connection without conditions. Margaret, my first business mentor, visited from the Midwest and observed this transformation with satisfaction. "I knew you had the business acumen," she told me, "but watching you build this life, this community, that's the real achievement." Her words crystallized an important realization. Success wasn't merely measured in company valuations or industry. Recognition. True wealth encompassed the freedom to live authentically, surrounded by people who valued you for exactly who you were. 2 years after that fateful Thanksgiving confrontation, I received an unexpected call from my father. "We're planning to visit Azure Bay next month," he said, his voice lacking its former authority. "Your mother has always wanted to see the Gulf Coast. Perhaps we could meet for coffee while we're there?" It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it represented something important. Initiative from their side, without financial motivation. After consideration, I agreed to a brief meeting in a neutral location. When the day arrived, I entered the beachside cafe with measured expectations. My parents looked older, my father's confident posture somewhat diminished, my mother's carefully maintained appearance showing signs of financial constraint. The conversation was stilted at first, safe topics about weather and local attractions. Eventually, my father cleared his throat and addressed the elephant in the room. "Your company was featured in the Wall Street Journal last month," he said. "The article was impressive." Coming from him, it was a monumental admission. "Thank you," I replied simply. "I've been thinking a lot about education," he continued hesitantly. "Perhaps I've been too rigid in my definition of what constitutes valuable learning." It wasn't a complete reversal of his lifelong beliefs, but it represented growth I hadn't thought possible. My mother reached across the table, briefly touching my hand. "We're proud of what you've built, Scarlett," she said quietly. Even if we didn't understand how to show it. The meeting lasted just under an hour. not enough to heal years of dismissal and judgment, but perhaps a beginning. As we parted, I felt neither the desperate need for their approval that had driven me for years, nor the angry rejection that had followed our confrontation. Instead, I felt compassion for their limited perspective and gratitude for having found my own path despite it. Back at my beach house that evening, I walked along the shore, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The business success was significant, certainly, but the personal growth was the true achievement, learning to define my worth by my own standards rather than external validation. The sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant colors. My phone buzzed with a message from Ethan, followed by notifications of a major new client signing and a reminder about tomorrow's scholarship committee meeting. This was my life now, rich with purpose, connection, and authenticity. The path hadn't been what I expected or what my family had prescribed. It had been messier, more challenging, and ultimately more rewarding than any traditional route could have offered. In choosing my own direction and staying true to my vision, despite constant doubt from those closest to me, I discovered a fundamental truth. Success isn't measured by degrees on walls or approval from others. It's measured by the courage to define and pursue your own vision of fulfillment. As I watched the sun sink below the horizon, I felt profound gratitude for the difficult journey that had led to this peaceful shore. The rejection that once seemed devastating had ultimately freed me to build something more authentic, both in business and in life.